Welcome, I'm your host, Last Rights. This is everything you need to know before you go to World Tier 3 and 4 with your Necromancer. First and foremost, I would say the most important thing is your gear. If you're looking for anything in particular, you need to make sure that you hunt for at least 3 of them on your item before you bother trying to make it work for your build. What I mean by that is I have damage to close enemies, damage to stun enemies, and damage to distant enemies. All 3 of those benefit me greatly because my golem stuns. I use a lot of close AoE damage, and I also do a lot of distant damage with my AoE when it draws blood, which can overpower. So all of those modifiers are very beneficial to doing damage for my build. Now, intelligence is not an ideal stat for me, but it is better than nothing, and it is something I can change in the future. So, optimization is going to be everything for your gear as you enter the end game. So, keep that in mind. Whenever you're rolling a rare item, this was a rare weapon when I found it. It had a high item power with some very high rolls for the damage to enemies mods. And I am looking to re-roll that intelligence at some point to a more desirable stat that works with my build. Perhaps willpower, overpower damage. It varies. It depends on what I get lucky enough to get. But for now, upgrading it costs so much. This is 95 intelligence is perfectly acceptable, and I already have 3 really good mods, so this is a great weapon in the meantime. You want to make sure that you're doing this with all of your items. Make sure that you find an item that has 3 good mods. That is the rule of thumb. 3 good mods and re-roll the bad one. If you get really lucky, yes, it may happen where you get all 4 things that work well with your build. That's absolutely wonderful. You should still try to re-roll one of them to see if you can even just get a higher percentage of it, or maybe an even more desirable stat. So re-rolling the first time is very cheap on a rare. Re-roll rare, then make it legendary with an aspect. When you're having a dry spell and looking for new gear, make sure that you're not neglecting the vendors. They can sell very solid pieces of gear, and they reset every hour. So whenever you are in town and you've been farming and you're just getting frustrated you can't find a new item, check the vendors. They may not be legendaries, but if you've saved your legendaries like I suggested in the prior video, you can use these to upgrade. So just go through, give them a look, and see if there's something that fits your build. Here's a great example. Damage reduction. That's awesome. Just having a flat damage reduction value on a piece of armor is amazing. If you're darkness skilled based, you have high lightning resistance on this, and you can drop that ultimate skill damage to something else if you don't run an ultimate. Or if you do run an ultimate, drop the lightning resistance for maybe some HP. So don't neglect the vendors. They can be a wonderful source of even an ancestral item like this, which is very, very desirable to have as a chest piece. So check your vendors. If you're in a dry spell, make sure that you're not just walking past the vendors every time you go to town and break your gear down and vendor your gear. Okay? So this is going to be another outlet to find a 4 mod rare item that will be able to be altered and then imprinted with a legendary aspect and give you a damn near best in slot item as a result. When selecting your defensive mods on your gear, you should be doing so based on whether or not you're playing softcore or whether or not you are fortified in your build. Both of those will be huge factors in what you select and how much of it you select. So, if you are not running fortification, you can lean heavily on resistances and armor. So, you can also, if you need a little bit of supplement, maybe you're dying too much, you're going to want to at least pick up a little bit of damage reduction. You can get this as a flat stat on a lot of items, and this will help you greatly. You can also just hunt for high life rolls on a piece of gear or two, and focus the rest of it into damage if you're playing on softcore. Now, if you are in hardcore, I highly suggest you fortify in your build in some way, shape, or form. This can be done a lot of different ways. So make sure that you are generating fortification in some way, if possible, on hardcore. If you are generating fortification, damage reduction while fortified, flat damage reduction as well, and sapphires will all compound on your gear very heavily and benefit you greatly. They work amazingly in tandem with damage reduction while injured. It's going to take a lot of damage to get you to the point where you're injured, and then it takes a tremendous amount of damage thereafter if you stack it, because these can roll very high values. This is just a sacred item, and it has 29.8%. This is also just a sacred item, and it has 32.4%. Now, with any stat that you stack in very high values, there's going to be diminishing returns. So you want to make sure that you don't neglect your armor and resistances as a result of relying on a stat like damage reduction. This is going to be one of the best ways that you can keep your character alive, as well as movement, and having all of that in tandem with a skill that makes you immune or unstoppable at least. Those will help keep you alive and escaping from bad situations. I like to also use more evade charges, or at the very least use movement speed after evading. You want to be able to evade and be as mobile as possible in bad situations. That's what's going to keep you alive defensively. Other defensive mods that you can go towards if you do not run damage reduction is flat resistances. These can roll very, very high amounts on pieces of gear. So if you're lacking on your stat sheet in any one of the 5 particular resistances, you can save yourself from a lot of elemental problems just by, like in this case, stacking a little more poison resist. I could stack a little more poison resist if I didn't have all this damage reduction, and I could survive a lot more poison damage. So find your weakest link and bolster it somehow to make sure that you're not going to die by that one bullet, whereas you're able to defend all of the other ones. So look for that in your defensive choices on those mods when you're re-rolling, or when you're looking for rare mods that drop on items, and also legendary mods as well. If you do find an item that is legendary, keep in mind you can re-roll that if it's close. If it's got 3 out of 4, you can still re-roll that. It's just going to be a little more expensive than a rare. So typically a rare is a more desirable starting point because you find a lot more of them, and you're going to have a cheaper time re-rolling it to get that 4th and final best option for your mods on your items. When selecting your offensive mods on your items, you have to consider 6 different categories of damage in Diablo 4. So utilize one of your offensive items for each category. That is the best way to maximize your damage output from each category. You don't want to put all of your damage percent into one category. It will not be as effective as spreading it out amongst all 6. So whenever you are putting your character together, your ideal goal is going to be to use one of each offensive item in your build as a damage output for a particular category. A great example would be additive damage. If I use my main hand weapon here, this can be all of my additive damage. Now, that would be a perfect scenario to get all additive damage on it. It's going to be hard to achieve that, but I found a way to get most of, if not all of, my additive damage bonuses on just one item, and then the intelligence can be another separate bucket or category that I can focus some damage into as well. So spreading it out this way and achieving my goal of generating as much of one category on an individual item as possible. So whenever you're selecting your offensive mods on your items, try to keep your damage categories in mind, and this will maximize your damage output whenever you're building your character. Good way of dealing a nice chunk of additional damage is overpower damage. Overpower damage is simply calculated. You have the normal amount that you hit for. Let's say it's 250. I just hit for 250 damage with my Blood Surge. This particular Blood Surge, when I cast it, was guaranteed to overpower. So we have our beginning point of 250. We are now adding on our overpower damage to that 250. If I had 500 life at the time and I was fully fortified for 500 fortify, they combine to 1000 when you add them up. Then they will be multiplied by the multiplier. If it's 100% multiplier, that would make it 2000. So our original hit for 250 will get an additional 2000 damage added to it. So we will do 2250 damage with the overpower. So you want to make sure in your build that if you have overpower damage, you want to do solid damage through the multiple categories, as well as having that overpower damage as a nice big bonus every now and then to your build. This is going to maximize your damage output. The best farming strategy in World Tier 3 and 4 would be to do Nightmare Dungeons when you have sigils. If you're out of sigils, do Helltides. If Helltides are not available at the time, rely on Tree of Whispers until they are, and look for Nightmare Sigils so you can get back to leveling your glyphs as soon as possible. Another thing to keep in mind when you're farming the Helltides is the mystery chests. They have some of the highest drop rates in the game. It's definitely something you want to include in your route when you are farming in a Helltide. Keep in mind they will not appear on the map until you're standing right next to them. So you can't just go into a zone like you normally can and be able to see the mystery chest on the map. You're going to have to check the locations, and here's an example of the interactive map. I'll include the link down in the description below of where they can possibly spawn. So while you're looking at jewelry or protection chests on the map, plan your route to include looking for the mystery chests that can spawn in each Helltide zone. Also, you will not be able to see the top half chest locations for jewelry, protection, weaponry, while you're in the bottom half, and vice versa. So if I'm in the top, I will not be able to see the chests in the bottom. Okay, keep that in mind when you're planning out your route and working in how you're going to hit each mystery chest possible location and get all of the other chests along the way that you're looking to farm. So when building your Paragon board, I want you to make sure that there is a huge pitfall where people will try to use 5, 6 boards, 7, 8. It spreads out your points so far that you barely get any rare and magic nodes. The rare and magic nodes are some of the strongest things for your character. If you try to spread out and grab 6 glyphs, it is not as beneficial as if you were to grab 4 to 5 glyphs. So try to avoid the pitfall of going too far out on your Paragon tree, because you'll end up grabbing tons of stat points just to get glyphs, whereas you could have gotten very powerful bonuses on a smaller number of better selected boards. So instead of reaching out a mile to getting a bunch of glyphs, you could stick to specific boards oriented in a direction that maximizes you getting to what you want on the board and getting out to the next board in as short of a path as possible. And this is going to allow you to get 4 to 5 at most glyphs without missing out on all of the rare and magic nodes that make your build so much stronger. So don't fall into that particular trap of the Paragon board. The other thing that I would suggest with the Paragon board going into the end game is take your favorite, most important to your build, power building glyph and max it to 15, but stop. It goes to 20, but I want you to stop at 15 and then spread out your experience on the alternate glyphs so that they can get to 15 also before you go above 15 on any one of them in particular. The reason why is the radius will increase to the maximum radius at 15. So you're going to want to get that bonus on every single glyph before you go above that level 15 for higher percentages, because they're very small incremental increases, whereas glyph radius size is going to be a huge bonus to your alternate glyphs. They may be your number 2 and 3 or 4 favorite glyphs, but having all of them at 15 is going to benefit you more, and it's going to be a lot better to have 3 level 15s, whereas you could get to 20, whereas it may take just as long to get to 20 as it would have taken to get 2 or 3 of them to 15. So you're going to have a much larger jump in power, and it's going to spread your power out, if you're, especially if you're using defensive glyphs as well as offensive glyphs. So keep that in mind when you're building your character, that just having a bunch of glyphs is not everything, and orienting the boards in a way to where you have the shortest amount of intermediary stat branches to get to your rare and magic nodes as possible, as well as grabbing those and not stretching out too far, because that's a huge pitfall of building the Paragon board. I see a lot of people fall into. They see these powerful glyphs and they go, I'll just get 7 of them and I don't need any of those rare and magic nodes. And by the time you get that far out on the board, even if the board, the final boards, the rare nodes are going to have such high requirements, because the further out you go, the higher the requirements are for the stats in order to get the bonuses on them. So don't make this mistake. I feel like it is something I see a lot of people giving bad advice, telling their viewers to go as far out into the board and just grab glyphs. Glyphs are not everything. The rare and magic nodes are just as good if you orient the board to where you have the shortest lengths between the things that you want. And you don't have to take everything on the boards. You can nitpick between what you want and then exit the board as quickly as possible. So if that's what you so choose, and then invest heavily into another board. But the best path is to choose the boards that benefit your build the most, grab those nodes, and then get out as short of a route as possible to the next board. You're going to save a lot of points this way and a lot of wasted leveling just to get the power that you're striving for. So keep that in mind when you're building your Paragon board. Level the glyphs together as opposed to one of them to 20 first and then spreading the love out to the others, and pathing intelligently. And also, the final thing, make sure that you avoid undesirable stats on the Paragon board. If your character, especially the Necromancer, strength is worthless, I covered this in the previous video, but I want to reiterate, it's so important. Avoid strength where possible. So I went this way to avoid going this way where I'd run into a strength. And the same thing happened here. So same with this. Want to make sure I avoid those strengths as possible, anywhere possible, so that I minimize my gains of strength, because it does not help me with these later rare nodes that are going to be very important to scaling the power of my build. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this series. the interactive map link is down in the description below, as well as our Discord. And I'll see you guys next time.